Political panel today. In the right corner, albeit on the left coast, it's our good friend James Hirsen, who is the columnist who writes the Left Coast Report. And on the right side of the country, but the left side, philosophically, we welcome back Ellis, Henican, radio and TV commentator. So, James, you're an attorney. We don't hold that against you. We just wonder constitutionally, is this classic regulatory overreach?
Overreach. They're basically making up power out of nothing. You remember the Federal Communications Commission is a creature of congressional legislation. Their jurisdiction does not encompass the internet. It is broadcast media, and they literally are basically creating law. They've become a little Congress and creating law. In addition to that, of course, is the big debate. And look, has the internet grown and flourished over the last 10 years because the free market is flawed? I don't think so. And so the idea that bureaucrats are going to make decisions about the internet basically is going to end up stifling innovation. And there's people both on the right and the left, including Mark Cuban, who's been very, very vocal on this, saying that the same thing I'm saying, that it'll stifle innovation. We've seen when government tentacles get into a medium like that, could we have a fairness doctrine on the internet in the future? It's a possibility once the government gets in there. So net neutrality is an Orwellian term because there's nothing neutral about what these regulations portend.
Well, I'm sure there's nothing neutral in the mind of Ellis Henican. Ellis, go ahead, try to sell me on turning the internet into a Title II utility.
Oh, this is easy, JD. The arguments are profound and persuasive. When the reality is that a couple of large, huge, rich, and powerful companies reach the point that they get preferred access. Their material goes 10 times faster than your material or my material. It's no longer the wide open internet anymore. In the early days, it was every kid in his bathrobe in the basement given a fair shake. Today, what's happened is that a few small, large corporations have found ways, because of their power and wealth and the velocity of their traffic there, to make it so that you and I and the rest of us don't have a fair chance there. Isn't it better to say, hey, everybody's got to be treated equally there? We don't care whether you're Viacom or AT&T or Apple. You know what? You guys don't get any special breaks. That's what this is all about, and you all ought to support it.
So is it really striking a blow for fairness, James, or in this threat from the multinational corporations, or is that just an excuse for the government to take over the internet?
You know, when the government and particularly the left want to expand their power, they talk about a crisis. And this is a manufactured, hypothetical crisis. There have been some tiny instances of cases where internet service providers proposed the idea of having separate charges depending on speed. So now what we're going to have to do is the government's going to dictate. Now, what is that equal speed going to be? What if a technology happens tomorrow that increases speed, but it costs more money? So the government will say, no, you can't innovate. You must stay at the same speed because you must charge the same for the same services. The free market's done a fantastic job with the internet, and as Mark Cuban said, they're going to expletive it up. They're going to ruin it.
Well, mindful of that, we're not trying to censor speech, but we want to give time to Ellis. Ellis, final 30 seconds to you. Go.
Let me give you an analogy. Say the Pacific Coast Highway, where James is. If you allowed anyone with a Ferrari to drive 200 miles an hour because they had a rich, fancy, powerful car, and you made those of us who have Chevrolets and Fords only go 55 miles an hour, that wouldn't be fair. Let's have a fair speed limit, a fair playing field, and let's have net neutrality that gives everybody a fair crack at it. Can't trust the corporations on this one, guys. I'm sorry, you just cannot trust those big boys.
But you're happy to bypass the Congress even with the problems on those corporations.
One speed limit One speed limit for everybody. That's the best way.
Our speed is full speed ahead. We're back with more of a discussion after the break. For the House, Ellis Henican on the left. He's at Newsmax, New York, and James Hirsen on the left coast, but with his right thinking, joining us via Skype from Los Angeles. James, of course, the author of the Left Coast Report. Now, I had my share of run-ins with Stinney, calling Kevin McCarthy a coward and saying that the Department of Homeland Security is twisting in the wind. Come on, Ellis, that's a bit of an overwrought statement, is it not? Not to mention a non-courteous description.
I'm sure Congressman McCarthy can handle the brick brats. I know he's tossed a couple in his time. Listen, the politics of this are just bizarre, though. You have to admit it. Here we are with the threat of ISIS, people worried in shopping malls across America, huge threats around the globe, some of them pointed in our direction. And Republicans, in order to make a political point that they know has no actual practical impact, are holding up the funding of Homeland Security. And many members of their own caucus think this is just simply ridiculous. But to put America at risk that way in order to make a symbolic political point, to try and take create a tougher task for 5 million people who are here without papers. Hey, listen, I can argue the moral question, but frankly, the politics, they're just bizarre, aren't they?
Bizarre politics, standing up for the Constitution and trying to rescind executive amnesty. James, your take on this?
Well, this isn't merely politics. I mean, there's always politics involved, but what this has to do with is integrity, and the integrity of the Constitution and separation of powers and the scope of the executive branch. Because not only is this just a flagrant violation of the constitutional powers of the presidency. Again, the president is creating power out of the air to give work permits. I mean, virtually everyone agrees that requires legislation. So after the landslide election in November, all that Congressman McCarthy and the other members of Congress from the Republican Party are trying to do is carry forth the wishes, the mandate of the people that put them back there, and that is to thwart some of this excess power, to use their powers, and this happens to be the power they have, the power of the purse. And so it's not just politics. I don't think the strategy was brilliant from the beginning, but the intent was to make a statement about constitutional integrity, and that's very important to this nation.
Yeah, I'm curious, Ellis, how do you make the case for not having the border security necessary, for letting the president go ahead and do what he wants to do? Isn't that a legitimate part of Homeland Security? Really, all games of gotcha and political catcalls aside.
Well, yeah, and we have a place and a forum in our society where we resolve those issues, JD. It's called the courts, and this issue is in the courts. In fact, the opponents won a very happy victory from a district judge in Texas last week. Why don't you let a thing play out in court where the legal debates are resolved?
Okay,
and don't put Americans at risk in the meantime. That's just wrong,
very quickly,
isn't it?
Final 20 seconds. So Congress should give up its legislative ability and just let the courts decide it, Jim? Last 20 seconds for you.
Well, when you see the track record of the administration when it comes to court decisions and court orders and any kind of legal restriction, the answer is no. I mean, the Republican Party has to use all the tools in their tool chest, and this happens to be one of them. And you have a great point, JD, that you pointed out, is that when you're talking about our national security, a secure border is an integral part of that.
And we will have to leave it right there. James Hirsen from the left coast, Ellis Henican from Newsmax, New York, our thanks to you both.